The joys of watercolour. If only we didn't have to think about the water. It would be so much easier. So why is it so tricky? It's getting that paint to water ratio right. We've all felt the stress of running out of paint right in the middle of something important, then, while that was drying, quickly trying to mix up a new bit of matching paint only to be totally frustrated and disappointed in the end. So the answer to this age-old problem is something we already know, but we just don't do it. Why? I don't know. We're all in such a rush to paint and create. We know that if we simply mixed up more paint than we needed for our task, we wouldn't have a problem. But why don't we do it? Well, paints are expensive and we want to use as little as possible. We don't want to waste our paint. It's too difficult to drill into our semi-softened pan paints, and it takes time. I would go through these thoughts every single day. And now, how can we overcome these issues? I found it's much more economical to buy tubes rather than pans, and I'm sure you have too. But Daniel Smith also has watercolor sticks that are exactly the same formula as the tubes, but less expensive again. The sticks are in fact one price for all the colors regardless of the series. I then just chop them up and use them in my pans. I'm not sponsored by Daniel Smith at all. I'm just a fan, and at the moment I have these. But then I need to know how much surface I need to cover on my painting and mix an amount of paint that will do the job. But always mix more. So there we go again. Will I be wasting paint? No. Once I had an accident with a tube of paint and half of it came out. I don't have it now to show you, but I used it for ages. I would use it, you wet it, use it, the water evaporates and you just use it again. You can even put it under the tap and it'll still be there. So I guess we're not wasting paint after all. If you're using pan paints, you need to spray them down and let them soften. Give them a few minutes or even more. It takes a bit of time. So now that we've re-established what we already know, let's prepare to paint a little 5x7-inch graduated wash. We'll start with our supplies. We need paper, water, a brush. A mop brush is ideal as it holds the most water and you don't have to re-dip as often. But if you take the time to prepare your paints, let's say 3 colors, all of the same consistency, then you could even use a brush that wasn't ideal and still get a good result. But you will need a palette that's good for the job. Like this one. I have so many palettes I could open a shop with them. I'm always on the lookout for deep wells, and here are some of my palettes. For this small 5x7, let's use this graduated palette. One side is deeper than the other, allowing for the watery mix in the deeper end and the thicker paint up the top. I'm going to show you how you can prepare for your next painting and have a really relaxing and enjoyable session. So, let's start with wetting our brush completely, then transferring 3 full brush loads of water to 3 wells of the palette. That'll be 9 in total. You can do more if you like. More is better than less. When you've done this, tilt the palette and see if you have an equal amount of water in each well. Next, I'm picking up some lavender from my very juicy palette. Now you say, how much? Well, a fair amount. We do have a lot of water, but the main thing is that it's the same into each of the 3 wells. Put as much paint in as you like because we will be testing and swatching. You can also use your fingers to squeeze out the rest of the paint that's still in the brush. Now it's time to wash your brush thoroughly and wipe to dry on a cloth or paper towel. I'm now picking up some raw sienna and doing the same. Same amount of paint into the same amount of water. And for my third colour today, I've chosen raw umber. You can choose any colours you like. Now we need to swatch the colours to see what they look like. Each time I pick up and change my colours, I wash my brush, dry my brush, because I don't want anything to ruin the consistency. As you can see, all three have an approximate viscosity or thickness, which means that they all have the same amount of water in them. One isn't thicker than the other. If I picked up some paint straight out of the paint box, it would be much thicker and darker, and vice versa. If I picked up more water, it would make a mess as well. Now let's see what this means for our graduated wash. I can change colours as often as I like. The thickness is the same, so it all works. I can re-dip as often as I like, and I can use any brush. Now, just to make sure that everything's right, we need to have our paper on an angle, slightly tilted. Gravity will work, and the water will run down to the bottom, and if there's anything there, we can just mop it up. And there you go, a perfect graduated wash or the first layer of your painting. I also believe that nothing could be more relaxing than having something to colour in, even just like a squiggle like this, or you can think of this as the first layer on your painting. Let's colour this squiggle in together, and on the way I'll show you little tricks you might find handy. We used 3 brush loads of water in our initial mixes because we're working on something small. So even using a smaller brush can be effective. I'll show you how. And also, instead of continually washing and drying your brush, you could use 3 different brushes. I mentioned using a smaller brush. Here I have a cheaper size 2 round brush. Nothing special. I dip into the paint, and when I apply it, I use an even back and forth motion, and you can paint it in very neatly without any streaks. We will be modifying our little paint pods, but just before we do that, I'm going to show you a technique with your brush that you might find handy. If you're wondering how I'm staying within the lines, it's because I'm aiming the tip of my brush to the line and then pressing onto the belly of the brush, which gives me stability to move slowly or fast, whatever I like. And this means control. Let me know in the comments below if you're starting to see some merit in all of this. If you can see yourself enjoying your painting process a bit more. Now let's take some brown and press on the belly of the brush again and tweak it a little. As we approach the corner of this triangle in here, I'm going to gently and slowly lift my brush, which will bring it back into a point, and both sides will be painted at once. Now I'm picking up some raw sienna and painting that little corner up there, and you'll see when I press on the belly of the brush, I have a lot of control and I'm able to leave that very fine sliver of white between the ochre and the brown. And then the brush does the rest. It's so much fun to paint when you've got enough paint to use and you don't have to think about mixing it. It's an exhilarating experience. Time to change it up a bit with the paint and add some more pigment to the mixes. I've added a brush load of lavender to my lavender mix, and now watch. As you can see, it's much richer and darker on the swatch. My paper is damp, and as I'm coming on top with more pigment, more paint, I'm not going to mess it up. If I was to go on top of this with water, I would very likely mess it up. Now let's try adding more water than we need to. Here I've painted a patch of colour and run out of paint and missed a spot as well. I quickly mixed some more paint, but in fact I wasn't quick enough and I had too much water in my mix. So when I added this on top, it's not right. That's too light, there's too much water in there, and now this water is going to push the pigment up and there will be a telltale line. To top it off, I also have an accidental drop of water. Now let's see what happens when this dries. Our uneven patch is dry now, as you can see, and our cauliflower is there sitting like a tree. Sometimes I even like cauliflowers because you can use them to your advantage if you want an effect like that, like special blossoms or trees. But now let's look at a way of rectifying the problem before you have one. Here I'm painting a second patch of brown and adding in a watery bit of paint, as you can see. And now I have a light spot and a dark spot with pigment flowing around here and there. But we all know that this is going to be a patchy patch. So the way to fix this is to wash your brush and dry it, and then use your brush to mop up the excess water and pigment of the dry area and the light area. And now our goal is to unify this patch by picking up some more mixed paint, a little bit thicker, and brushing over evenly, and this should dry well. Now let's see what happens if we lay in some more paint, thicker again, and this time it's a lighter paint going over a darker one, over that dark banana. This technique is called charging and can be done light on dark or dark on light, either way. It does need to be damp, and my paint is quite thick, pasty in fact. But I don't want it to be wet, so I need to take out those the little pool of wet paint that's in there. So to do that, I know you know what to do. We need to wash our brush, dry our brush, blot out the little wet bits, and then stroke over the top to even it out. And it's a beautiful effect. Now I'm adding some thick raw umber to my initial mix. As you can see, it's quite thick, creamy and pasty. And I can create a little pattern. My painting is still damp underneath. The moral to this story is that we can always use thick paint over thin paint when it's wet. And if you start painting by pre-mixing a pool of thin paint that you can add thick paint to, you'll never be in trouble. You end up using your jar of water just to wash your brush. Now I'm going to go around this shape that we created in the banana and just have a bit of fun. It's great because we don't have to think about it. All the hard work of thinking about the water and paint has been done. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this method or any questions you might have or anything to do with water control, and we'll solve them together because I really want to help you get the most out of this beautiful experience of watercolor.